and then
no
we're going to
ceasefire with the
go behind the
Palestinian
enemy lines and make our mission and doing our mission.
Played these games before! I said I played these games before!
Lebanon. This is the war that never ends. As hard as it may be to believe, the Israeli army found itself invading Lebanon more than 5 times in the past 5 decades. Invading, staying, withdrawing, and here it starts all over again. But what is it about the land called the Switzerland of the Middle East that give Israel anything but peace? Didn't actually mean it to rhyme, but that sounded nice. Today, we're going to take a deep dive and explore just why you might be watching this video in 40 years from now and still find it relevant. For the first 3 decades after the creation of Israel in 1948, the border with Lebanon was actually one of the calmest in the region. With chaos all around as Israel fought repeated wars with Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, Lebanon remained the chill guy who stand aside. But that chillness had very little to do with stability, because Lebanon itself was never built like a typical state. From the moment it gained independence, its entire system was based on a fragile balance between the religious communities, mostly Christians and Muslims, living within it. For years, that balance barely held. And then, in the late 1960s, something happened that would transform southern Lebanon into the front line of a completely different war. After being pushed out of Jordan for trying to revolt against its king, armed militants of the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, were exiled and decided to move their headquarters north, into Lebanon. But what followed up wasn't very surprising. In the refugee camps and villages of southern Lebanon, the PLO started building training bases, armed units, and launch sites for attacks across the Israeli border. And with the Lebanese government too weak to fully control its own territory, the entire region slowly turned into a launching ground for cross-border warfare. By the mid-1970s, Lebanon itself was already collapsing into one of the most brutal internal conflicts in modern Middle Eastern history, the Lebanese Civil War. Militias were forming everywhere, foreign powers getting involved. And along Israel's northern border, a new reality was emerging. One where the country on the other side of the border was no longer fully in charge of what happened inside it. And so, Israel decided to step in. In March 1978, after a deadly Palestinian attack inside Israel known as the Coastal Road Massacre, coming from Lebanon, the Israeli leadership made a decision. For the first time on a large scale, the Israeli army crossed the Lebanese border. The operation became known as Operation Litani. The goal was relatively limited: push PLO forces north of the Litani River, destroy their bases in southern Lebanon, and create some distance between Israeli towns and the PLO bases. Within days, Israeli forces moved deep into southern Lebanon. Through a surprisingly light combat, PLO fighters were pushed north. But just as it seems like Israel might be getting close to reaching its goals, and as the PLO started losing its power, under international pressure, Israel was forced to withdraw and return to its original borderline. But there was one important detail. Frustrated of the rushed withdrawing, instead of simply leaving the area, Israel helped establish a local militia that would continue controlling the border region. This force became known as the South Lebanon Army. And to monitor the situation, the United Nations deployed peacekeepers known as United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, believing this will be the solution that'll prevent the situation from happening again. On paper, the crisis had been stabilized, but in reality, almost nothing had been solved. The PLO was still in Lebanon, the Lebanese state was still collapsing, and the civil war inside the country was only getting worse. As much as I'd like to tell you much has changed since, by the early 1980s, tensions once again began rising. With many Palestinian attacks and Israeli raids in response, here we were once again at the starting point. Only this time, things escalated much too quickly. In June 1982, an assassination attempt on Israel's ambassador in London became the final trigger. Israel launched a massive military operation, this time called Operation Peace for Galilee. Unlike the limited 1978 operation, the objective here was far more ambitious. Israeli forces didn't just enter southern Lebanon, they kept advancing with a clear goal in mind, all the way to Beirut itself. For the first time in modern history, an Israeli army was surrounding an Arab capital. Inside the city were thousands of members from the Palestine Liberation Organization, desperately fighting through the long siege. Eventually, under global supervision, the PLO leadership evacuated Beirut and moved its headquarters far away to Tunis. On paper, Israel had achieved its main objective. The PLO was finally gone. Soon enough, the IDF withdrew from almost all of the area it occupied, but a security zone to keep the border safe. I'm sure now at least that front will get quiet, right? Only for the next 20 years, Israel will slowly start to sink in that infamous Lebanese mud. And that mud would become one of the longest and most controversial chapters in Israel's military history. Because the moment the PLO left Lebanon, something else began to rise in the vacuum they left behind. One that would eventually prove even more determined and far more deeply rooted in Lebanon itself. In the early 1980s, with the help of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from Iran, a new Shiite militant movement began forming in southern Lebanon. A movement that called itself Hezbollah. Unlike the PLO, which operated largely as an external Palestinian organization, Hezbollah was Lebanese in its blood. Its fighters came from the very villages where the battles were happening. And their goal was simple: to get Israel completely out of Lebanon, and from there on, to lead to its extinction. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, the security zone in southern Lebanon turned into a constant battlefield. Israeli soldiers and their local ally, the South Lebanon Army, were stationed in fortified outposts scattered across the hills. But Hezbollah fighters adapted quickly. Instead of conventional battles, they relied on ambushes, roadside bombs, and guerrilla tactics. Prime Minister Ehud Barak ordered the IDF to pull back to the internationally recognized border. Overnight, Israeli forces left their outposts. The South Lebanon Army collapsed, and Hezbollah fighters quickly moved into the territory Israel had just abandoned. Across much of the Arab world, Hezbollah declared it a historic victory, the first time an Arab militant movement had forced Israel to withdraw without a peace agreement. For a moment, it seemed like the long conflict on the Lebanese border might finally calm down. But once again, that calm would not last very long. In July 2006, Hezbollah launched a cross-border raid into Israel. During the attack, several Israeli soldiers were killed and 2 were captured. Israel responded with massive airstrikes and a ground invasion into southern Lebanon. And suddenly, the region was once again thrown into a full-scale war. The 2006 Lebanon War had begun. For 34 days, Israel and Hezbollah fought one of the most intense conflicts the region had seen in decades. Thousands of rockets were fired into northern Israel. Israeli forces pushed back into southern Lebanon. Entire towns were evacuated, same old cities bombed, and both sides claimed victory when a ceasefire was finally declared, with still no real solution and the UN force still standing as a bywatcher. But the deeper reality? Here we were again at the starting point. For the next 17 years, this front got relatively quiet. Wouldn't call it peaceful, as it really was just more self-focused, I'll say. Hezbollah, while tightening its hold over Lebanon, focused on getting stronger and more advanced, digging tunnels, bunkers, and rebuilding its arsenal, as Israel got more focused on, well, fighting with its southern neighbor. But that was only until it all came together and everything changed. When Hamas launched its massive attack on Israel from Gaza on the 7th of October 2023, Israel immediately prepared itself to a matching attack coming from Lebanon. And within hours, Hezbollah joined the war, trying to strike Israel by the same element of surprise. But by now we could say it did not go as they probably expected. The biggest change in Israel's perspective after the 7th of October was their boldness on the battlefield. And this time they were going absolutely all in. I really think there is no need to describe the amount of pressure and power this front held in the past 3 years. We've all got to see in real time with the pager operation, the assassination of Nasrallah, and once again, the invasion. As of the time of the recording of this video, Israeli forces are still inside Lebanon, and once again, soldiers on both sides are fighting on the same hills, the same villages, the same valleys, where their fathers and grandfathers fought on before them. Lebanon still is the war that never seemed to end.